The sun was beating down hard on the military base in Afghanistan. Dust swirled everywhere as trucks rolled in and out of the compound gates. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead as he walked toward the main checkpoint. He had been deployed for 8 months now, and the heat still got to him every single day. As he approached the security gate, Marcus noticed something that made him shake his head in annoyance. There was a woman standing guard at the checkpoint. She looked young, maybe in her late 20s, with her hair pulled back tightly under her helmet. Her uniform was crisp and clean, which immediately irritated Marcus. He had seen too many soldiers who looked perfect on base, but had never seen real combat. The female guard was checking identification cards and examining vehicles with careful attention. Marcus watched as she thoroughly inspected each person and vehicle that passed through. Her movements were precise and professional. But Marcus saw this as weakness, rather than competence. "Great, just what we need," Marcus muttered to his buddy Jake, who was walking beside him. Another desk soldier playing army. Jake glanced at the woman and shrugged, not really caring one way or the other. When it was Marcus's turn to pass through the checkpoint, he walked up with his chest puffed out and a smirk on his face. The woman looked up at him and politely asked to see his identification. Her voice was calm and steady, showing no emotion. "You know, sweetheart," Marcus said loudly enough for others nearby to hear, "maybe you should be serving coffee instead of playing soldier. This is a real war zone, not some training exercise back home." He handed over his ID with an exaggerated gesture, making sure everyone around could see his disrespectful behavior. The woman took his identification without reacting to his comments. She examined it carefully, just as she had done with everyone else. Her face remained completely neutral, showing no anger or embarrassment at his words. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant Thompson," she said politely, handing back his ID. Marcus was disappointed that he hadn't gotten a bigger reaction from her. He had expected her to get flustered or angry, but she remained completely professional. This only made him more determined to continue his harassment. "I'm just saying," he continued, raising his voice even more. "Some people belong in the kitchen, not on the front lines. This isn't a place for someone who probably can't even carry their own equipment." Several other soldiers had stopped to watch the exchange, some looking uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior. The woman simply nodded and moved on to help the next person in line. Her calm response made Marcus feel even more frustrated. He wanted to get under her skin, to prove that women didn't belong in combat roles. In his mind, he was protecting the integrity of the military by pointing out what he saw as obvious weaknesses. As Marcus walked away from the checkpoint, he felt satisfied with himself. He believed he had made his point clear to everyone watching. In his opinion, women soldiers were a liability, and someone needed to say it out loud. He didn't notice the disapproving looks from some of the other soldiers who had witnessed his behavior. Over the next few days, Marcus made it a point to go through that same checkpoint whenever possible. Each time, he would make similar comments to the female guard. He would question her qualifications, suggest she wasn't tough enough for military service, and generally try to undermine her authority. The woman never responded with anger or defensiveness. She always remained professional and polite, doing her job with the same careful attention to detail. This consistency began to annoy Marcus even more. He interpreted her calm demeanor as proof that she was weak and didn't belong there. Marcus started encouraging other soldiers to join in his harassment, but most of them refused. Some even told him to leave the woman alone and focus on his own duties. This resistance from his fellow soldiers only made Marcus more determined to prove his point. What Marcus didn't know was that his behavior was being noticed by people much higher up in the chain of command than he realized. The woman he was harassing had friends and colleagues throughout the base, and word of his disrespectful conduct was spreading quickly through unofficial channels. The stage was set for a confrontation that would completely change Marcus's understanding of who he was dealing with. His arrogance and prejudice had blinded him to the reality of the situation, and he was about to learn a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his military career. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first encountered the female guard, and his behavior had only gotten worse. Every morning, he would deliberately choose her checkpoint line, even if it meant waiting longer. He had turned harassing her into a twisted daily routine that gave him a sense of power and superiority. "Morning, Princess," Marcus would say with a mocking smile. "Ready for another day of pretending to be a real soldier?" The woman would simply nod and ask for his identification, never showing any reaction to his cruel words. Marcus had started bringing other soldiers with him, hoping to create an audience for his daily show of disrespect. Most declined to participate, but a few younger soldiers would snicker at his comments, which only encouraged him to become more aggressive in his taunting. One particularly hot Tuesday morning, Marcus decided to escalate his harassment even further. As he approached the checkpoint, he noticed the woman was conducting a thorough vehicle inspection. She was crawling under a truck, checking for potential threats or contraband, with the same careful attention she gave everything else. "Look at that," Marcus announced loudly to the soldiers behind him in line. "She's actually getting her hands dirty for once. Probably the first real work she's done since getting here." Some soldiers in line looked uncomfortable, while others shook their heads in disapproval of Marcus's behavior. When the woman finished her inspection and stood up, Marcus noticed dirt on her uniform from crawling under the vehicle. This gave him what he thought was perfect ammunition for more mockery. "Wow, you actually look like a soldier now," he said with fake surprise. "Too bad it's just dirt and not real combat experience. I bet you've never even heard a shot fired in anger." His voice carried across the checkpoint area, drawing attention from guards and other personnel. The woman brushed the dirt from her uniform and walked over to process Marcus's identification. As always, she remained completely professional despite his increasingly aggressive behavior. She examined his ID carefully and handed it back without saying anything beyond the required pleasantries. Marcus felt emboldened by what he interpreted as weakness. He decided to push even harder, hoping to finally crack her calm exterior. "You know what I think?" he said, leaning closer to the checkpoint booth. "I think you're here because someone felt sorry for you. Not because you earned it. Real soldiers don't need special treatment or lower standards." For the first time in weeks, the woman looked directly into Marcus's eyes instead of focusing on his identification. Her gaze was steady and unwavering, but she still said nothing in response to his accusations. This brief moment of eye contact somehow made Marcus feel less confident, though he couldn't understand why. Other soldiers waiting in line had begun to whisper among themselves about Marcus's behavior. Some were clearly disgusted by his treatment of the female guard, while others seemed curious about why she never fought back or reported his harassment. Word about the daily confrontations had spread throughout the base. Soldiers in different units had heard about the staff sergeant who was constantly harassing the woman at Checkpoint 3. Some expressed admiration for her professionalism under pressure, while others wondered why she didn't defend herself more aggressively. What none of them knew was that the woman had been carefully documenting every incident. She kept detailed records of Marcus's comments, noting dates, times, and witnesses present during each encounter. Her military training had taught her the importance of proper documentation when dealing with harassment situations. Marcus began to interpret the growing attention as validation of his behavior. He thought other soldiers were watching because they agreed with his assessment of women in combat roles. His ego grew larger with each passing day, and he became more convinced that he was performing an important service by exposing what he saw as military weakness. The woman continued her duties with unwavering professionalism despite the daily abuse. She arrived early for her shifts, performed her security checks with meticulous attention to detail, and treated every person who passed through her checkpoint with respect and courtesy. Her dedication to duty remained constant, regardless of how she was being treated. Marcus had no idea that his behavior was being observed by people far above his pay grade. Senior officers had become aware of the situation and were watching carefully to see how it would develop. They were particularly interested in how the female guard was handling the harassment and whether intervention would be necessary. The situation was building toward a climax that neither Marcus nor most of the observers could have predicted. The woman he had been tormenting for weeks was about to reveal something that would completely change everyone's understanding of who she really was and what she had accomplished in her military career. Marcus's arrogance had blinded him to subtle clues that might have warned him he was making a terrible mistake. The stage was set for a revelation that would humiliate him in front of the entire base and teach him a lesson about respect and judgment that he would never forget. The morning of September 15th started like any other day on the base. Marcus woke up feeling particularly confident and ready to continue his routine harassment of the female guard. He had no way of knowing that this would be the day his world turned completely upside down. As he walked toward Checkpoint 3 with his usual swagger, Marcus noticed something different in the atmosphere around the base. There seemed to be more activity than normal, with officers moving around with increased urgency. Several vehicles he didn't recognize were parked near the command center, but he didn't think much of it. "Another boring day in paradise," Marcus said to Jake, who had reluctantly agreed to accompany him to the checkpoint again. Jake had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior over the past few weeks, but he hadn't found the courage to speak up against it. When they arrived at the checkpoint, Marcus was disappointed to see that there was no line. The female guard was standing alone at her post, reviewing some paperwork on a clipboard. This meant there would be no audience for his daily performance, which took some of the fun out of it for him. Well, Marcus said loudly as he approached. "Looks like it's just you and me today, sweetheart. No crowd to impress with your fake soldier routine." He handed over his identification with his usual condescending attitude. The woman took his ID and examined it as she always did. But today, Marcus noticed something different in her demeanor. She seemed more alert, more focused than usual. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, though Marcus was too absorbed in his own arrogance to recognize what it meant. "You know what I've been thinking?" Marcus continued, warming up for what he planned to be his most aggressive harassment session yet. "I've been wondering who you know in the command structure that got you this cushy assignment, because there's no way someone like you earned it through merit." For the first time in weeks, the woman looked up from his identification and spoke directly to him. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," she said in a calm but somehow more authoritative voice, "I need you to remain here for a few minutes. There are some people who want to speak with you." Marcus was confused by this unexpected development. "What are you talking about? I don't have time to waste standing around here. I have real military duties to attend to, unlike some people." He reached for his identification, expecting her to hand it back as she always did. But instead of returning his ID, the woman set it aside and picked up a radio from her belt. "This is Checkpoint 3, she said into the device. "Please send them over now." Marcus heard a response through the radio, but couldn't make out the words clearly. Within minutes, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of 6 men in military uniforms was walking toward the checkpoint with purposeful strides. Even from a distance, Marcus could tell these were not ordinary soldiers. Their bearing, their confidence, and something about their overall appearance suggested they were special forces operatives. As the group got closer, Marcus began to make out details that filled him with growing dread. These men had the lean, muscular build of elite soldiers. Their uniforms bore patches and insignia that Marcus recognized as belonging to Navy SEALs, some of the most respected and feared warriors in the entire military. The SEAL team approached the checkpoint with military precision. Marcus noticed that their leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, was looking directly at the female guard with what appeared to be respect and familiarity. This was not what Marcus had expected at all. When the SEALs reached the checkpoint, something happened that made Marcus's legs feel weak. The team leader stepped forward and rendered a perfect military salute to the woman Marcus had been harassing for weeks. The other 5 SEALs immediately followed suit, creating a line of elite soldiers showing formal military respect. "Good morning, Major," the team leader said in a voice that carried clear respect and admiration. "We're ready for your briefing whenever you are." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet as the word "Major" hit his ears. He stared at the woman in shock, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. A major was an officer rank far above his own staff sergeant position, and the fact that Navy SEALs were saluting her and requesting briefings suggested she was someone extremely important. The woman returned the SEAL's salute with military precision that Marcus was seeing clearly for the first time. Her posture straightened, and suddenly everything about her demeanor revealed the confidence and authority of a seasoned military officer. The transformation was dramatic and unmistakable. "Thank you, Chief," she replied to the SEAL team leader. "We'll begin the briefing in 10 minutes. Please have your men review the mission parameters we discussed yesterday." Her voice carried the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect from elite soldiers. Marcus stood frozen in place, his mouth hanging open as he tried to process what he was witnessing. The woman he had been mocking and disrespecting for weeks was not only an officer who outranked him significantly, but apparently someone important enough to brief Navy SEAL teams on military operations. The realization of his monumental mistake began to sink in, and Marcus felt a cold fear creeping up his spine. He had been insulting and harassing a superior officer, which was a serious military offense that could result in court-martial and imprisonment. His arrogance and prejudice had led him into a situation that could destroy his military career and possibly his entire future. Marcus stood paralyzed as the reality of his situation crashed down on him like a collapsing building. The woman he had been tormenting for weeks was not just any officer, she was a major, and clearly one who commanded the respect of Navy SEALs. The implications of his behavior over the past month were staggering. The SEAL team leader, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, continued his conversation with the major as if Marcus didn't exist. "Ma'am, the intelligence reports you requested have been compiled and are ready for your review. The operation timeline has been adjusted based on your recommendations from the last briefing." Marcus watched in growing horror as the major nodded and responded with the confident authority of someone clearly in charge of important military operations. "Excellent, Chief. Has the extraction team been briefed on the new rally points? I want to make sure everyone understands the revised contingency plans." "Yes, ma'am," Rodriguez replied. "Your modifications to the original plan have been implemented, and the team is confident in the new approach. We've run through the scenarios multiple times, and everyone agrees your strategy significantly improves our chances of success." The conversation continued around Marcus as if he were invisible, but every word hammered home the reality of his massive mistake. This woman wasn't just a random soldier assigned to guard duty. She was clearly a strategic planner and operations officer working directly with Special Forces units on classified missions. Jake, who had been standing silently beside Marcus throughout this entire exchange, finally found his voice. Marcus," he whispered urgently. "Maybe we should go. Like, right now." But Marcus couldn't move. His feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. The major finally turned her attention back to Marcus. And for the first time since he'd been harassing her, she addressed him directly with her full authority visible. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," she said in a voice that carried unmistakable command presence. "I believe you have been waiting here for quite some time. Was there something specific you needed?" Marcus tried to speak but found his throat completely dry. He managed to croak out, "No, ma'am. Nothing specific, ma'am." The formal address felt foreign coming from his mouth, especially after weeks of calling her sweetheart and princess. One of the younger SEALs looked at Marcus with obvious curiosity. "Chief," he said to Rodriguez, "isn't this the guy who's been giving the major trouble at the checkpoint?" The question was asked loud enough for everyone to hear, and Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment. Rodriguez looked at Marcus with the kind of cold stare that Special Forces operatives usually reserved for enemy combatants. "Is that right?" he asked, his voice carrying a subtle threat. "Someone's been disrespecting the major?" The major held up her hand to stop the conversation from going further down that path. "That's enough, Chief. Staff Sergeant Thompson is learning some important lessons about assumptions and respect. I believe he understands his mistakes now, but the damage was done." Word about the confrontation spread through the SEAL team, and then throughout the base faster than Marcus could have imagined possible. Within hours, everyone on the base knew that the staff sergeant who had been harassing the female guard had been publicly humiliated when it was revealed she was a major working with special operations. As the SEALs prepared to leave for their briefing, Rodriguez turned back to Marcus one more time. "Staff Sergeant," he said in a voice that carried years of combat experience. "In the teams, we judge people by their actions and capabilities, not by their appearance or gender. The major has saved more lives and completed more successful missions than most soldiers will see in their entire careers. You might want to remember that." The major gathered her materials and prepared to leave the checkpoint. As she walked past Marcus, she paused for just a moment. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," she said quietly. "Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through harassment. I hope you'll remember that in the future." Marcus watched as the Major walked away with the SEAL team, her bearing and confidence now obvious to anyone with eyes to see. He realized that all the signs had been there from the beginning: her professionalism under pressure, her calm authority, her meticulous attention to detail. His prejudice and arrogance had blinded him to the obvious truth. Jake grabbed Marcus by the arm. "Dude, we need to get out of here before this gets any worse," he said urgently. "Do you realize what you've done? You've been harassing a major who works with SEALs. Your career is over if this goes up the chain of command." But Marcus was still standing there, staring after the group as they disappeared into the command building. For the first time in his military career, he was beginning to understand that his assumptions about women in combat roles had been completely wrong. The Major hadn't just proven she belonged in the military. She had demonstrated that she was more qualified and respected than he was. The checkpoint area, which had been the scene of his daily harassment campaign, now felt like a monument to his ignorance and prejudice. Marcus knew that his life in the military would never be the same, and he had no one to blame but himself for the humiliation that was surely coming his way. Within 24 hours of the checkpoint incident, Marcus's life had become a nightmare. News of his humiliation had spread throughout the entire base like wildfire, and everywhere he went, soldiers whispered and pointed at him. The story had grown with each telling, and by now everyone knew he was the staff sergeant who had spent weeks harassing a superior officer. Marcus tried to go about his normal duties, but it was impossible to escape the stares and whispered comments from fellow soldiers. In the mess hall, conversations would stop when he entered, only to resume in hushed tones after he passed. He could feel the judgment and disapproval radiating from every person around him. "There goes the guy who called Major Williams princess," he heard one soldier say to another as he walked by. "Can you believe someone could be that stupid? She's got more combat experience than half the men on this base." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Major Williams. He had never even bothered to learn her name during all those weeks of harassment. This small detail somehow made his behavior seem even more despicable, even to himself. That afternoon, Marcus received the message he had been dreading. He was ordered to report to Colonel Patterson's office immediately. The colonel was the base commander, and a summons to his office usually meant serious trouble. Marcus's hands were shaking as he put on his dress uniform and prepared for what could be the end of his military career. The walk to the command building felt like a death march. Other soldiers avoided making eye contact with him, and Marcus realized that his reputation on the base was completely destroyed. Even if he somehow survived the upcoming meeting with the colonel, his time at this base would be miserable. When Marcus arrived at the colonel's office, he was surprised to find that he wasn't the only one there. Major Williams was sitting in a chair across from the colonel's desk, her posture straight and professional. She looked up when Marcus entered, but her expression revealed nothing about what she was thinking. Colonel Patterson was a stern man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see right through people. He had served in multiple combat deployments and had a reputation for being fair but absolutely unforgiving when it came to breaches of military discipline. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," the colonel said without looking up from a file on his desk. "Please have a seat." Marcus sat down in the chair next to Major Williams, carefully avoiding any eye contact with her. The silence in the room was suffocating. The colonel finally looked up and fixed Marcus with a stare that made him want to disappear. "I've been reading some very interesting reports about your behavior over the past month, Staff Sergeant. It seems you've been conducting a sustained campaign of harassment against Major Williams here." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but the colonel held up his hand for silence. "Before you say anything, I want you to understand exactly who you've been harassing. Major Williams is one of our most decorated intelligence officers. She has served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. She has been personally responsible for planning operations that have saved hundreds of American lives." The colonel picked up a thick folder from his desk. "This is Major Williams's service record. She has received the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Action Badge. She speaks 4 languages fluently and holds a master's degree in strategic intelligence. The SEAL teams specifically request her for their most dangerous missions because they trust her planning and leadership abilities." With each word, Marcus felt himself shrinking further into his chair. The magnitude of his mistake was becoming clearer with every detail the colonel revealed about Major Williams's distinguished career. Now, the colonel continued, I understand that Major Williams has been documenting your harassment for weeks. She has dates, times, witnesses, and detailed accounts of every incident. She could have ended your career at any point simply by filing a formal complaint. Marcus glanced at Major Williams, wondering why she hadn't reported him earlier. She still showed no emotion, maintaining the same professional composure he had seen at the checkpoint every day. The reason she didn't file that complaint, Colonel Patterson said, as if reading Marcus's thoughts, is because she wanted to see if you were capable of learning and growing from this experience. She believed that education might be more valuable than punishment. The colonel stood up from his desk and walked around to face Marcus directly. However, after yesterday's incident with the SEAL team, it's clear that you haven't learned anything. Your behavior has become a discipline problem that affects the entire base. Other soldiers have lost respect for our command structure because they've watched you harass a superior officer without consequences. Marcus felt his heart pounding as he realized the colonel was building up to some kind of punishment. His mouth was completely dry, and he could barely breathe as he waited to hear his fate. Major Williams has requested that she be allowed to address you directly before I decide on disciplinary action, the colonel said. I'm going to honor that request. He returned to his seat and nodded to the major. Major Williams turned in her chair to face Marcus directly for the first time since his weeks of harassment began. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried an authority that made Marcus feel like a child being lectured by a parent. Major Williams looked directly into Marcus's eyes, and he found himself unable to look away despite his overwhelming shame and embarrassment. When she spoke, her voice was measured and controlled, but every word carried the weight of authority and experience. Staff Sergeant Thompson, she began, I want you to understand why I didn't report your harassment immediately. It wasn't because I was afraid of you, or because I thought your behavior was acceptable. It was because I believed that you were acting out of ignorance, rather than genuine malice. Marcus tried to speak, but she held up her hand to stop him. For the past month, you have questioned my qualifications, my courage, my right to serve in combat roles, and my basic competence as a soldier. You did this based solely on my gender and your own prejudices about what women can and cannot accomplish in the military. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in before continuing. What you didn't know is that I have spent the last 8 years of my life serving this country in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I have been shot at, mortared, and bombed. I have planned operations that saved American lives and captured high-value terrorist targets. Major Williams opened a folder she had been holding and placed a photograph on the desk where Marcus could see it. The image showed her in full combat gear, standing with a group of soldiers in what was clearly a war zone. Her face was dirty and exhausted, but her eyes showed the same calm determination Marcus had seen at the checkpoint. This photo was taken in Helmand Province, after a 3-day operation to rescue captured American contractors, she said. I planned that operation and led the intelligence team that made it successful. All 4 contractors came home alive because of the work my team and I did. She placed another photograph on the desk. This one showed her receiving a medal from a general, with other high-ranking officers applauding in the background. This is from the ceremony where I received the Bronze Star for that operation. The citation specifically mentions my courage under fire and my exceptional leadership in combat conditions. Marcus stared at the photographs, finally beginning to understand the true magnitude of his mistake. This woman wasn't just a qualified soldier. She was an exceptional one whose achievements far exceeded anything he had accomplished in his own military career. I could have destroyed your career weeks ago, Major Williams continued. One complaint to Colonel Patterson about a staff sergeant harassing a superior officer, and you would have faced court-martial proceedings. But I chose not to do that because I hoped you might learn something valuable from this experience. Colonel Patterson leaned forward in his chair. Staff Sergeant Thompson, Major Williams has just demonstrated more mercy and wisdom than you deserve. She has shown you the same kind of leadership and character that makes her one of our most valued officers. Major Williams picked up the photographs and returned them to her folder. I want you to understand something very important, Staff Sergeant. Every time you questioned whether women belong in combat roles, you were insulting not just me, but every female soldier who has served with honor and distinction. Your prejudices don't just hurt individuals, They damage the entire military structure. She stood up from her chair, and Marcus instinctively started to rise as well, before remembering that he was supposed to remain seated. The military is stronger when it includes the best people, regardless of their gender, race, or background. When you exclude qualified people because of your biases, you make everyone less safe and less effective. Colonel Patterson also stood up, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. Staff Sergeant Thompson, you are being transferred to a different base effective immediately. This transfer will be noted in your permanent record as disciplinary action for conduct unbecoming a soldier. You will also attend mandatory diversity and sensitivity training. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. He was grateful not to be facing court-martial, but the transfer meant starting over at a new base, where his reputation would follow him. He knew this incident would shadow his career for years to come. However, the colonel continued, Major Williams has specifically requested that you not be given a dishonorable discharge or reduction in rank. She believes that you can learn from this experience and become a better soldier and person. Major Williams looked at Marcus one final time. I hope that someday, you'll understand that respect isn't something you give based on someone's appearance or background. It's something you earn through your actions and character. I also hope you'll use this experience to become a better leader who judges people by their capabilities rather than their demographics. As Marcus left the colonel's office, he felt completely different than he had when he walked in. The arrogant, prejudiced man who had been harassing Major Williams for weeks was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the damage that assumptions and biases could cause. Over the following months at his new assignment, Marcus found himself constantly thinking about the lesson Major Williams had taught him. He began to examine his own prejudices and work actively to overcome them. He became known as someone who treated all soldiers with respect regardless of their background, and he often shared his story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice and assumption. Years later, Marcus would look back on his encounter with Major Williams as the most important learning experience of his military career. The woman he had tried to humiliate with his ignorance had instead given him the greatest gift possible: the chance to become a better person.